Hi everyone, my name is Calvin Cherry, and I have written a prequel to Bram Stoker's classic Dracula titled Stoker: Evolution of a Vampire. So in this video blog series, I've been discussing the historical locations in my novel and how they actually tie in with Dracula and Vlad the Third. So today's topic is Snagov Monastery. And the word snaga in Bulgarian means human body. And so when we get to the discussion about Vlad the Third's remains, it's interesting of that connection there. So Snagov Monastery is about 40 kilometers north of Bucharest on a tiny island off the shore of Lake Snagov. So this goes back all the way to the 11th century. So the original building there was actually a wooden church. And that building actually sank around the time period of 1453 into the lake. So to actually get to the island, you actually have to go across Lake Snagov. So up until the past decade or so, you actually had to get in a boat and travel across that way. But over the past decade, the Romanian government, their economy has done very well in the past decade, and they were able to actually build a bridge that you can now walk across. So a stone church was built in the 14th century, and it was originally used for printing. It was a printing press used to print religious texts. So Vlad the Third came along and built additional fortifications around the structure in around 1456, and this included a prison, a torture chamber, a escape tunnel, and a bell tower. So Vlad the Third used the location to actually, he would take in prisoners, and there's, in recorded history, he actually shot cannons across a footbridge that he had also built. And so if you can imagine these prisoners on the bridge, shackled in chains, and they would get blown off the footbridge and be dragged to the bottom of the lake where they would drown. So you can actually see the remains of the prison actually behind today's church. And interesting enough, the bell tower actually sank into the lake as well. And there's stories of if you're quiet while the wind is blowing, you can actually hear the bell of the bell tower. So the structure itself, the structure that you can actually see today, is a brick Byzantine style building that's actually covered with loads and loads of tiles. The towers are polygonal, and if you can imagine, hundreds of fresco paintings on the inside. And I was actually at this structure back in November of 2019, and you can actually spend hours there taking in all the hundreds of the fresco paintings in the church, and they are quite amazing. So Vlad the Third died in 1476, and he actually was killed in battle. So there's different stories of whether he was killed by the Turkish army or his own army. And so there's all kinds of accounts of Vlad the Third actually dressing in the Turkish uniform. So whether or not he was killed by the Turkish soldiers or one of his own, that's kind of, we'll always probably remain a mystery. But he was definitely beheaded, and his head was taken back in a jar preserved in honey. And the Turkish Sultan in Istanbul, so his head was put on a stake and paraded around the land. So his headless body was supposedly buried in the church, in the monastery, at the back of the church at the altar. So in 1931, there was an excavation that took place at the altar where his body was supposedly buried. So what they ended up uncovering was a large empty hole. In the hole, there was no coffin, there were no remains of anything other than just animal bones. But further excavations revealed in the front of the church, to the right of the entrance. So in a further excavation to the front of the church, to the right of the entrance, they revealed a coffin with a richly dressed, decapitated corpse. And this corpse was identified as Vlad the Third's body. So the remains was actually brought to the museum in Bucharest, where it was supposedly studied, where they did DNA testing. So one account, the story goes that shortly after it was brought there, the body disappeared. However, other stories indicate that the body is still there and it's actually being used to uncover additional DNA testing. Actually, Prince Charles has actually requested a DNA sampling to tie his own DNA with that of Vlad the Third's. So why was this remains not buried underneath the altar? So various accounts. One account discusses that the original monks that buried the body did not feel like Vlad the Third was worthy to be buried at the altar closest to God. So there's stories that he was just too evil, and Vlad the Third was not only nicknamed Vlad Tepish, which means the impaled, but also the berserker, due to the many people that he killed over the years and impaled. So that's one account, that he wasn't godly enough to be buried at the altar. So he was buried to the right of the entrance, where his body would actually be stepped upon over and over and over again. So how this destination ties in with my novel, Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire. So there's a chapter in my novel where Bram Stoker actually goes to the monastery to destroy Dracula. So along the way, he actually goes across the lake, and the trip is actually very harrowing. When he gets to the island, there's a huge storm, and eventually he gets trapped in the monastery, where he encounters something that was actually more terrifying than what he actually sought after. So I don't want to get too into the details and spoil the plot, but it's a one of my favorite chapters in my novel. And I love this destination a lot, and the whole monastery just is very mysterious. And the more you read, the more interesting it becomes. Which I definitely want to give a shout out to two individuals, Radu R. Florescu and Raymond T. McNally, and they have authored two books. This first one, In Search of Dracula, became very famous in the 70s and actually was turned into a documentary of the same name, which Christopher Lee actually narrates. And the second book was published years after, and both is very great reading. And anyone who's into the historical Dracula or the fictional Dracula would love these two novels. So I hope you found this video blog interesting. And if you feel like my book is something that you would be interested in, and of course it's historical in nature, not only does it tie in the fictional Dracula with Bram Stoker, but also with the historical Vlad the Third as well. So my book can be found at all online book retail stores. If you go to a brick and mortar store and it's not there, they'll be more than happy to order it for you. And of course, if you prefer an autographed copy, just private message me and I'll be glad to hook you up. So again, thank you for your time. I will see you again next week. Goodbye.